Scottish smoke, Australian whiskey. Yeah. Hey there, I'm Nath Martyn, the Whisky Scribe. Taste is subjective, whiskey is diverse, and this channel is all about understanding it well enough to enjoy it on your own terms. So today I've got another sample from Hellyers Road Distillery. Now, although the sample was given, opinions are going to be my own. As a disclaimer, I do usually like Hellyers Road these days, but this is what we've got here. Since the early days of the distillery, around 2004, we have been working with Scottish Peated malt. We source our peated malt from Baird's Malt of Inverness in Scotland to continue our 22-year history of crafting Australia's oldest richly peated single malt whiskies. Aged in first fill American oak bourbon casks from Heaven Hill, intense and smoky in a distinctly Tasmanian way. So this was launched as part of Tasmanian Whisky Week. Think of the whisky festival that happens in Islay each year. That's Australia's version of that down in Tasmania, where whisky restarted in Australia. That's a long story, I'll cover it one day. But the peat is from Scotland, and it's from Inverness, which is in the northern Highlands of Scotland. Now, the important point to take away from that is a lot of people, your default impression of peated whiskey from Scotland is Islay. Now, Islay peat is made from decomposing seaweed because the island used to be submerged. I cover all of that when I talked about the Islay region in my Whiskey Regions video. But because the Islay peat is made from seaweed, you get that medicinal saline sort of note coming through. And a lot of people think that's just what peat tastes like, but peat is different depending on where it's from. So the sort of flavors you can expect from like a Highland peat is rich, earthy and campfire-like, because their peat is made more of decomposing grass and heather. It's not seaweed. So it's a different flavor profile altogether compared to your Ardbegs and the Froigs and things like that. But I love that they've actually provided some of the peat. So I'm going to give it a smell here. So let's, this will be a different pour video. Get out of the bottle. How the frickin' hell did they get that in there? Okay. So this is your Scottish peated malt. So this is barley that has been dried out using like the smoke from peat fire. Gonna have a smell of this. You see, that already kind of smells more like, it's kind of like a barbecued meat sort of smell. It's not super intense either. So with that in mind, the specs of this exact whiskey are Hellyers Road Richly Peated. It's a single malt whiskey. The peat is 45 to 55 ppm, so similar to an Ardbeg 10. It's aged 9 years in first fill ex-bourbon casks from Heaven Hill, non-chill filtered, no colour added, bottled at 48.3%, and it's retailing at $190. Now in Australia, look, prices are different everywhere. Australia has a really, really high excise on alcohol, which already puts our prices right up there. So things like your 12-year-old single malts from Scotland are usually around about the 80 to 100 mark if they're not being overpriced. 190 for a 700ml bottle of 9-year-old Australian whiskey that is peated is actually a really, really good price. So a lot of the other releases from Hellyers Road, like the 20-year-olds and things like that I've also reviewed on this channel, they retail around about the $1,000 to $1,500 mark. And that's actually kind of fair because Australia has a massive Angels share. We lose a lot of whiskey over time to the Angels, and at 20 years, there's not a lot of whiskey left in the barrel. So what you're getting is one of probably only about like 50 to 100 bottles. And I always say, like, if any price point for whiskey in Australia anyway, over about $200, that excess money, that's not paying for better quality whiskey, that's paying for uniqueness. It's paying for the fact that not many people are getting to try a whiskey of this high age statement, or there's only a few bottles of this specific cask, or it's from a distillery that's no longer producing whiskey. If you're spending over $200 on a whiskey, it's uniqueness that you're paying for, not better quality. So the thing that I really like about this is it's in that price range where it's still actually a matter of the quality of the whiskey to the price. It's not any other marketing story that needs to happen. you're looking at whether or not $190 is worth it for a 9-year-old peated whiskey aged in Tasmania. So let's see. Here comes the rain. I don't know if you can see, but that is really, really oily. Classic Hellyers Road whiskey. It's a nice, thick, oily whiskey. Those natural oils, they're going to help keep that flavor in there. The color, it's reasonably light. Although it's 9 years, it's coming out of a bourbon cask, and it is a peated whiskey. I do want to know scientifically what is the reason that peated whiskey always looks a little bit lighter than the same age whiskey aged in the same casks. But yeah, until somebody can tell me that, I'm just gonna always speculate. But anyway, color, it's a nice gold straw sort of color. On the nose, oh. Before I go in any further, instant honey and ashy smoke straight away on the nose. Beautiful, but straight away. It's nice. The more you nose at it, the smoke sort of steps aside a little bit. It's always there, but you start to get like a little bit of a floral sort of note, like almost like a really light potpourri, with that honey sweetness still lingering around. But yeah, it's very, the sweetness is quite light and floral for a peated whiskey. Which has me intrigued, so I'm going in, Slange. That's really, really interesting. So on the nose, it was kind of comparable to like a 12-year-old Highland whiskey, a 12-year-old Highland peated whiskey. In terms of just the balance of the smoke and the other flavor notes that are going on in there, yes, it was a little bit more floral than what you would usually expect, but the honey was still there in the background. On the palate, the smoke is still there, but it's far lighter than you would expect for a 9-year-old whiskey, or even a whiskey that knows like a 12-year-old whiskey. And the thing I didn't even think to mention was, for one thing, I always say when it comes to Australian age statement whiskies, you almost need a table on the back, because our default thought when it comes to age statements is Scottish age statements. And whiskey ages faster here in Australia. We have, like, even in Tasmania where it's a little bit cooler, the fluctuations between hot and cold temperatures is extensive compared to Scotland. And even just the atmospheric pressure changes that we get as storms come rolling in. So while in Scotland, temperature changes are very light, the whiskey in the barrel is sort of like absorbing into the wood and going back in like this. Whereas in Australia, that process is happening like this. So the whiskey kind of has a chance to develop and age a little bit faster than it does in Scotland. So a 9-year-old Australian whiskey would probably be coming across a little bit more like a 15-year-old Scottish whiskey. But then the other thing is, peat as a flavor note in whiskey actually dissipates over time. So peat is going to be strongest in the whiskey when it's like 5 to 8 years of age, and I'm talking about Scottish whiskies, 10 years, and then sort of like after around about 12 years is where that peat sort of starts to like drop off. It doesn't disappear completely, but it gets lighter and lighter, which is why you don't see a lot of Islay whiskies being sold at the 40-year mark, because they just wouldn't come across as Islay whiskies because you wouldn't be getting much of that peat. This is a 9-year Australian whiskey, and I was expecting a 9-year level of peat from a Scottish whiskey, but it seems like that peat dissipation maybe happens at a similar accelerated rate in Australia to the aging process, because the peat on this is quite light. So this is the peated barley is around about the 45 to 55 ppm mark, which is what Ardbeg 10 is. The peat level on this is there. It's beautiful. It's not as intense as an Ardbeg 10. And that's not even because it's not Islay peat. I'm trying to think of the right words to describe it, because it's still a peated whiskey, It's still lovely, and it's still more of like a Northern Highland sort of peated whiskey, in that it's a little bit ashy, it's earthy, but it's so subtle at the same time. So if you wanted to concentrate on the honey sweetness that's happening in here, you could do that, and the peat would be like this lingering background thing. But if you want to focus on the peat, you can get those wisping tendrils of campfire smoke coming through. You can still actually get a little bit of like the biscuity sort of notes of the whiskey itself as well. But yeah, they say richly peated. It's a wonderfully rich whiskey, but it's very balanced and it's very smooth. It's incredibly smooth for a whiskey that is as peated as it is. I feel like I'm being quite conflicting here, because I'm saying that like the peat is quite light, it's still prevalent, it's still there, but it's just so balanced that it doesn't have to be the prevailing flavor note if you don't want to focus on that, which I think is a good way of appealing for, it's kind of, in terms of who this would be for, I would say this is for somebody who appreciates peated whiskey and Australian whiskey and like loves to see the two come together. But it's soft enough that somebody who, not necessarily somebody who hates peat, but somebody who prefers to steer away from it could still actually enjoy this whiskey. There's enough other flavor notes. The peat isn't the prevailing note, it's an accompaniment. It's almost like a duo of the smoke and the honey happening here. I really like this, and like for $190 for an Australian whiskey, that's actually a really good quality whiskey at a good price. Because like I said, some of the other ones I've had, sensational whiskies, but when they're 20 years of age, they're well out of a lot of people's price range. And that price point, you're paying for the fact that it's unique, the fact that there's only a couple of hundred bottles that came out of that cask that tasted like peaches. That was a cool whiskey. But this is actually something that's affordable for most whiskey drinkers, I think. Like, granted, on the $190, it's probably more on like the special occasion whiskey, but this is a special occasion whiskey. It's a good peated whiskey. So I think if you're a peat lover who enjoys Australian whiskey, this is definitely well worth a try. And if you're not somebody who likes peat, but you can take it a little bit and somebody offers you a glass, give it a shot. It's worth it. So thank you, Hellyers Road, for sending that to me. Always happy to try Hellyers Road whiskey these days. Enjoy what's in your glass, hopefully as much as I enjoyed this, and slange. How am I going to get this back in that bottle?